I stood at the kitchen counter, hands trembling slightly as I set down the last bowl of mashed potatoes. Outside, laughter drifted through the living room where family and close friends gathered. Our holiday tradition, one that always brought me such comfort, was supposed to be a time for gratitude. Yet tonight, the warmth of family was barely keeping my simmering emotions in check. The secret I'd stumbled upon a month ago gnawed at me, ripping through every semblance of peace I tried to maintain. My husband's unusual work hours suddenly made perfect sense when I caught the way his gaze lingered on the nanny that afternoon. Amber was young, with that effortless charm and wide-eyed innocence that our children adored. But behind that mask, her subtle glances and careful touches spoke volumes I could no longer ignore. I hadn't meant for tonight to be the time, but as I watched him casually laugh with our guests, the simmering resentment boiled over. He was pretending, living this perfect family man role, while Amber, the woman who'd comforted our crying children and put them to bed, was a living reminder of his betrayal. I walked into the dining room, heart hammering in my chest. The lights were dimmed, candles flickered, and everyone looked up with bright smiles as I took my seat next to him. He leaned in with a smirk, whispering something trivial, his hand resting over mine. I fought the urge to recoil, choosing instead to steady my breathing as I met his eyes. "Everyone," I began, my voice ringing out with a steady, controlled calm, "I'd like to say a few words." I felt his hand twitch, but I pressed on, determined. This year has been one for growth, challenges, and change. Some parts I'd like to forget. I paused, the room falling into a tense silence, and some people I'd rather not remember. His gaze darted toward Amber, her face pale in the candlelight, her eyes widening as my meaning struck. I let the silence stretch, the seconds taut with everything unsaid. But my husband's hand squeezed mine, pleading silently for me to stop. Yet there was no stopping. I'd been drowning alone in this deception, and tonight, I was coming up for air. He stared at me, eyes wide with a silent warning, but I held his gaze, unyielding. Some people take vows, commit to family and loyalty, only to betray it all in the worst way. My voice was louder now, tight with the weight of suppressed emotion. Around the table, everyone's faces reflected a mix of surprise and confusion. Only Amber looked stricken, her gaze dropping to her lap as if willing herself to disappear. My husband shifted uncomfortably, his usual confident demeanor slipping. "Honey, maybe we should talk about this later?" His voice was low, intended just for me, but I ignored him. I'd stayed silent for weeks, even as my mind replayed the moments, the quiet whispers, and her lingering presence in our home. Not tonight. I wanted him to feel every bit of shame I'd carried alone. "Why, so we can keep up appearances?" I said, my voice a hiss now, unmistakable in its anger. "Amber, maybe you'd like to share a toast? I mean, you've practically become family," I added with biting sarcasm. Her head jerked up, her face now ghostly pale as she looked between us, unable to hide the guilt that had been bubbling under the surface. The table was silent. Friends and family exchanged uneasy glances, not sure if they were witnessing some dark joke or a holiday disaster unfolding in real time. My husband finally let go of my hand, his jaw tight. "That's enough," he said in a low, warning tone. But it was far too late for that. I'd been silenced for too long, while he'd been indulging in this fantasy of deception under the very roof we'd built together. I rose slowly, pushing my chair back as everyone stared. "Enough? No. You know what's enough? Pretending." I turned to the room, feeling the tremor in my voice as I forced out the words. "To all of you here tonight, thank you for being a part of our family. I only wish I could say that everyone sitting at this table has been honest, faithful, and true." Amber looked like she might faint, but she stayed frozen, her face streaked with guilt. He stood too, desperate to stop me from saying more, but I was done caring about what he wanted. "Amber, you're dismissed," I said, my voice steely. The words felt satisfying, a finality that filled the silence. "You don't need to come back. Not ever." She looked at him, as if he might save her, but he only stared, caught between shame and anger, his own betrayal exposed to the world. And as Amber scrambled to gather her things, the life we'd known shattered quietly around us, like the delicate stem of a wineglass under too much pressure. As Amber rushed from the table, her footsteps quick and unsteady, the silence she left in her wake felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. My husband stood rigidly across from me, the full weight of our unspoken words pressing down on us, our family, and every onlooker who had just witnessed the unraveling of our life together. Our guests shifted awkwardly in their seats, some clearly horrified, others averting their eyes as if by doing so they could erase what they'd just seen and heard. The once festive table, decorated with holly and candles, now felt like a stage where something unspeakable had been revealed. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered, low enough that only I could hear. His face was drawn, his mouth set in a bitter line. But there was no sympathy left in me, no regret for finally pulling the thread that unraveled this facade. No. I replied, voice equally quiet, but edged with the pain of months of silence. And what did you think I should have done? Watched you pretend this was still a marriage, while you carried on in secret. He flinched at my words, his eyes darting toward our family members, some of whom were now fidgeting, no longer hiding their discomfort. My mother, seated closest to me, touched my hand lightly, her face a mixture of support and concern. Maybe it's best if we all, she began, only to be cut off by his cold, restrained voice. No, he said, eyes fixed on me. Let them stay. You wanted an audience, didn't you? I swallowed, realizing this wasn't going to end as neatly as I'd imagined. I had expected him to shrink to feel shame, but instead he stood there, more defiant than I'd ever seen him, as if my betrayal, my exposing him, had wounded him in some deep way. You were so quick to put it all out here for everyone to see, he continued, his voice rising just slightly. But did you ever stop to think why? Did you ever wonder how we got here? Of course I did, I spat back, my calm cracking under the weight of his accusation. I thought about it every time you looked at her with that stupid, secret smile. Every time you stayed out late with some excuse about work or a late meeting. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. But he wasn't finished. I'm not making this your fault, but I also won't stand here and let you play the innocent victim. You wanted everything, perfect home, perfect family, but when things got too real, too complicated, you just shut down. His voice wavered, an edge of something like hurt slipping through. The weight of his words pressed down on me, stirring emotions I hadn't expected to feel tonight. I fought back the tears threatening to surface, not wanting him or anyone to see me break. That doesn't excuse what you did, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. No, he replied quietly, and for a moment, something in his face softened. No, it doesn't. He reached for his coat, his movements slow, his gaze lingering on me one last time before he turned toward the door. If you need someone to blame, you've got it. Blame me, hate me, whatever makes you feel right. But just know this, he gestured between us. It's gone because we let it die, both of us. With that he left, and the door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. The door clicked shut, and I was left staring at the empty space where he'd stood, feeling the weight of his words settle like stones in my chest. The room was silent, stunned into stillness as our guests grappled with the remnants of our broken holiday. I felt exposed, raw, as though my skin had been stripped away, leaving nothing but a pulsing ache beneath. Around the table, faces I'd known for years watched me with a mix of pity and discomfort. My mother squeezed my hand again, but I pulled away gently, suddenly desperate for air. The walls felt too close, the candle flames too bright, flickering with an intensity that set my nerves on edge. Without a word, I walked away from the table through the kitchen, and out onto the back patio where the cold winter air hit me like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. I gulped it in, letting the chill numb the heat of humiliation and the anger still smoldering in my chest. My breath came in jagged clouds, each exhale dissipating into the darkness. All I'd wanted was a chance to confront him, to finally lay everything bare, to make him feel some of the pain he'd inflicted. But as I stood alone in the freezing night, I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow ache that grew with every heartbeat. The truth was that, despite everything, his words had struck something deep within me. We had both let things slip away, piece by piece, year by year, until we were strangers sharing a house rather than a home. It wasn't a justification for his betrayal, I'd never allow myself to see it that way, but maybe it was a truth I couldn't ignore. The perfect life I'd clung to was only ever that, a vision of perfection, but never the real thing. Footsteps crunched on the frosted grass behind me, and I turned to see my mother coming toward me, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she stepped into the cold. She didn't speak, just came to stand beside me, her presence a quiet anchor against the storm inside. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice soft and filled with a gentle firmness that I recognized from my childhood. Sometimes, the hardest part is not letting go of them, but letting go of the life we thought we were building. Her words settled over me, resonating painfully. I blinked hard, focusing on the stars scattered across the cold, dark sky. Somewhere between the vows we'd made and the secrets he'd kept, the life I'd imagined for us had become just that, imaginary. I don't know who I am without it, I confessed, my voice barely audible. The admission felt like the final blow, the last piece of the illusion crumbling away. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch warm and steady. You'll find out, she murmured. Piece by piece, you'll build something real this time. Something just for you. I let the words sink in, their quiet comfort taking root, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply, fully, as though the weight of everything was finally loosening its hold. Tomorrow, I would begin to sift through the rubble of the life I'd clung to, and I would face whatever lay beneath it. The truth, raw and unfiltered, was that I hadn't lost a life, I just lost a lie I'd told myself for too long. And as I turned back toward the house, I felt a strange, fragile sense of hope rising within me, as delicate and as strong as the dawn that would eventually follow this longest night. I lingered a moment longer in the cold, my mother's hand still on my shoulder, grounding me. The night air was sharp, but with each breath, a new kind of calm settled within me, a quiet clarity I hadn't known I needed. Inside, I could see the dim, flickering lights of our holiday table, the remnants of laughter and warmth now hanging in suspended disbelief. Turning to my mother, I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling the words carry the weight of my gratitude and something deeper, a sense of release. I was finally ready to let go of the life I thought I needed to hold so tightly. Back inside, guests were quietly collecting their coats, avoiding eye contact as they murmured goodbyes. The evening had been shattered, and everyone seemed eager to escape, to pull the curtain closed on this painful display of truth. I didn't stop them. Their absence, somehow, felt right, like a final sweeping away of what no longer belonged. When the last guest had left, I stood alone in the quiet, empty house. The silence was stark, but not unbearable. The weight of secrets, lies, and pretense had lifted, leaving behind an emptiness that wasn't frightening but strangely freeing. This was a new beginning, an open space where something real could take root. I walked to the hallway mirror, catching my own reflection for the first time in what felt like years. The woman staring back looked tired, yes, but also resolute, stronger somehow. I wasn't the wife, the perfect hostess, or the woman desperately holding on to a life slipping through her fingers. I was just me, flawed, broken, and still standing. In the morning, I would begin again. Piece by piece, I would rebuild a life that belonged to me alone. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find that in the quiet corners of solitude, I could start something truer, something worth having. I took one last look at the empty house, then turned off the lights, feeling the darkness wrap around me as a gentle closing chapter. And as I climbed the stairs, each step felt lighter, each breath deeper. Tonight, for the first time, I was stepping forward into the unknown. And for the first time, I felt ready.